going to show you how to warp a Mirrix loom for bead weaving both without the shedding device and with the shedding device. These are the two different ways that you can weave beads on a Mirrix loom. Without the shedding device, you will weave beads using the traditional method. So you have your warp and your beads, you put your beads behind your warp threads, and then you sew over the front of the warp threads. That's the traditional method. We also have a shedding device, which is this. And basically what that does is you warp the loom with double warp threads, and the shedding device will pick up half of those warp threads so you can actually place your beads in between those warp threads. It's a little bit different. It tends to be faster, although the setup takes a little more time. And we're going to show you both ways. Now, our different looms come with a shedding device or don't come with a shedding device. If you have an 8-inch or a 12-inch loom without the shedding device, those come with one warp coil. This is a warp coil. We also call it a spring. And basically what the warp coil does is it goes on the top of your loom and it spaces your warp threads. So depending on which warp coil you have, it will space the warp threads to fit different types of beads. Now, not all projects need a warp coil. Some very thin ones, you don't need it. But if you're doing a wider piece, you definitely want one. The 14 dent warp coil is perfect for a piece that is with 11/0 seed beads. So that is what comes with the looms without the shedding device. Looms with the shedding device come with 4 different warp coils, so you have a lot more options. But no matter what, you can always buy more and different warp coils on our website. Now on this loom right here, we have a bottom spring kit. This is an optional accessory. It happens to be on the loom that we're using, so we're gonna show you how to warp with it. You don't need it, but it's very helpful for wide bead pieces and especially bead pieces with the shedding device. It just is the same as the top warp coil, but it's on the bottom, so it helps organize your warp threads at the bottom of the loom, just like they're organized at the top. And what you do is you put a matching warp coil on the bottom that you have on the top. Also, if you have a bottom spring kit on your loom and you don't feel like using it, you don't have to. You can just warp right around that. So I am going to get started. I'm going to first warp the loom on one side for bead weaving without the shedding device, and then I'm going to warp it on the other side for bead weaving with the shedding device. So the beginning process is exactly the same. So we're going to start out. This is our loom, pretty much how it comes out of the box. We have rotated our wing nuts to expose some of the threaded rod. Now each of our looms can be, there's a range of heights that they can be. So if you want it taller, you have more room to weave a longer piece. If you want it shorter, you are wasting less warp thread if you're weaving a shorter piece. So the loom can go up fairly high or down lower. You want about 2 inches of threaded rod showing no matter what size piece you're doing, because in addition to changing how tall the loom can be, moving these wing nuts also adjusts your tension once your warp is on the loom. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to move our loom to whatever our desired height is, and we're going to measure just to make sure we have it even on both sides. It's really important with weaving to always have everything on each side of the loom even. So we've done that. The next thing we're going to do is choose our warp coil and put that on the top of the loom. Because we have the bottom spring kit, we're also going to put one on the bottom of the loom, a matching one. But if you don't have a bottom spring kit, don't worry about this. So to place the warp coil on the top of the loom, you simply do that. Place it right in that tray, and then on the bottom of the loom, you do the exact same thing. So, very easy. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to put the warping bar on the loom. This gives you a place to tie your warp threads to. And also later on what's going to happen is you can move your warping bar to the bottom of the loom, and when you've woven your piece and you've run out of room on the front of the loom, you can actually advance your weaving, which means you can loosen your tension and bring your warping bar up the back of the loom, and this will rotate your piece around the back of the loom so you have more room to weave on the front. So it allows you to weave a longer piece. So this is a very handy little thing. So the first thing that we want to do, these are our wooden clips. We want to make sure that those are even. So it looks like these are pretty good. We're going to take them and we're going to swing them to the back of the loom. If you see these little indentations, there are ones on either side of the loom, but those will be facing inward. Now, if your clips are falling down, you can always, or you need to adjust them, you can use these little plastic screws on the back of the clips to do so. So now we're just going to take our warping bar and we're just going to place either side in those little indentations. So there we go. And then we're just going to push the clips inward slightly so we have a stable and secure bar. So now what I'm going to do is begin warping. Warping is actually very easy. You just have to kind of learn the rhythm of it and you'll be able to warp anything. I'm going to warp, as I mentioned before, one piece here and one piece here. The first piece will be without the shedding device, and the second piece will be with the shedding device. There's a little bit of a difference between warping for those. So the first thing that I'm going to do is tie onto the bar. Very simple. And I really want to decide where I want my piece. Because I'm warping two thinner pieces, I'm just going to do one on either side. That's a really great thing about a Mirrix loom, is that you can warp multiple pieces if you have a larger loom. If I'm weaving one thin piece, instead of weaving it in the middle of the loom, I'm going to want to weave it on one side and then take a piece of ribbon like this one to balance the warping bar on the other side once I'm done warping. This is because if you warped it in the middle, once you swing out these clips, your warping bar would be unbalanced on two sides and you'd want to tie it up with two different ribbons, which is more difficult than just doing it on one side. But the other solution is to warp two different pieces at the same time, which is also makes things a lot faster if you want to make that many pieces. So we start out by tying onto the warping bar, and now you can really start in either direction. I'm just going to start going down. What you do is you go down under the loom. Now the warping bar is on the back of the loom. This is important to remember because we never cross over the center of the loom. We're always wrapping around the loom. So we're going to bring our warp thread down the back of the loom. Now, if you don't have a bottom spring kit on your loom, this won't matter. But you're going to, if you do, you're going to place your warp thread in one of the dents. Now, a dent is the space in the warp coil or the spring at the bottom of your loom. So you're just going to place it in one dent. Then you're going to come up the top of the loom, and no matter what loom you have, you'll have this spring at the top, and you're just going to place your warp thread in a dent on the top of the loom. Now you're going to come from the front to the back, around the back of the loom, and here's the big thing with warping. Now every time you hit your warping bar here in the back of the loom, you are going to do a U-turn around that warping bar and come back where you came. So that's the rule, is that every time you hit the warping bar, you change direction. So you're just wrapping around the loom, but when you hit the warping bar, you come back in the direction you came. It doesn't matter if you go from the front to the back or the back to the front around the warping bar, as long as you're just doing a U-turn around it. So not wrapping around it, just doing a U-turn. So now we are bringing our warp thread around from the back to the front of the loom, and when we get back up here to this warp coil, we're just going to place our warp thread in the next dent over. Then we're going to go back down the front of the loom. When we've hit the spring at the bottom, we're going to place our thread in the next dent over. We're going to go around from the front to the back, and then we've hit the warping bar, so we're going to do a U-turn around it, just like that. Back down the loom, around from the back to the front. When we hit our bottom spring, we're going to go through the next dent, around the front of the loom, into the next dent on the top, from the front to the back. We've hit our warping bar. We're just going to do a U-turn around it. It is that easy. That's all warping is. So now we're going to come back up to the top. We're going to place our warp thread in the next dent over. We're going to come around the loom, place our warp threads in the warp coil, back around. Now we've hit our warping bar. We're just going to do a U-turn around it. Super easy. Now, common mistakes that people make is accidentally bringing your warp threads through the center of the loom. A way to make sure you haven't done that is just to periodically check. Just bring your hand right through, make sure you haven't done that. The other thing that I like to tell people is don't warp in a distracting environment, especially when you're just starting. Don't try to watch a television show or have a conversation with somebody when you're warping. Just focus on warping. It doesn't take very long, and when you make a mistake, it's a pain to go back and fix it, so you really want to do it right the first time. So next dent over, I'm going to go around the front of the loom, into that next dent, around the back, hit the warping bar, do a U-turn, come back the direction we came. You can see how this can be really fast once you get good at it. Into the next dent over, we've hit our warping bar, do a U-turn, around. Someday, we should have a contest. Who can warp faster? The fastest Mirrix Loom warper out there. All right. So I think by now you kind of see how to do this. Around the bottom of the loom, up the front, the top, you're going to put your warp thread in the next dent over, and every time you hit that warping bar, you just come back the direction you came. Very easy. Now, one thing to mention is that you shouldn't ever drop your warp thread. This is because while you don't ever have to warp while you're warping, keeping a lot of tension on it, you want to have even tension. So if you drop it, if you go let the dog out or get the door in the middle of warping, you're going to make your tension not even. The great thing, one of the great things, there are a lot of great things about a Mirrix Loom, is that we use continuous warping, which means it's a lot easier. This is the warping that we're doing. It's a lot easier to get even tension. A lot of looms have systems set up where you have to tie and tie and tie and tie, and it's really difficult to get even tension. And the most important thing with weaving is having even and really good tension. So I'm just going to make sure all my threads are organized. I think this is another important thing when warping, just to, as you go, making sure everything is organized. So you really, you don't want to cross your warp threads. You don't want to do anything too fast. I'm just going to check, make sure I've been doing this correctly. All right. So when I have warped as far across as I want to, and the way you can figure this out is if you are doing a piece that's 12 beads across, you're going to want 13 warp threads. So it's one more warp thread than how many beads you have. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I have 13 warp threads. My piece is going to be 12 beads across. So I am going to tie off onto the warping bar because I'm done. The way you count the warp threads, just to note, is on the front of the loom, not the back of the loom. So these are 13 warp threads right here. Another thing to mention is If you run out of warp thread, you can do the same thing I'm doing now, tie off onto the bar, and then you can just tie back on and continue warping the way you were before. So that's an important thing to remember. You don't need to always have tons of warp thread, enough to warp a whole piece. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut my warp thread off right here, and I'm just going to tie onto the warping bar here. So I'm going to do a knot, and then I'm going to do another one, and it is as easy as that. There we go. So this is the beginning of being warped. I am going to warp another piece on this side. I just want to note though, if you are doing one thin piece on one side, like I said before, you're going to bring your warping bar down to the bottom of the loom after you release the clips. And I'm going to show you how to do this part later. And then you're just going to take some kind of ribbon or string. You're going to wrap it around your loom and around your warping bar, tie it, and that's going to help balance your warping bar. But for now, I'm going to warp on this side for bead weaving with the shedding device. So now I'm going to show you how to warp a Mirrix loom for bead weaving with the shedding device. Now it is almost the same. The only difference that you have to remember is that you're going to be putting each warp thread in a dent twice. So instead of going warping, putting your thread in a dent, then coming back around and putting it in the next dent, when you come back around, you'll put it in the same dent that you started with. And this is because the shedding device is going to lift up those threads so you can put the beads between them. So you're going to tie onto the bar. We're going to go around the loom into one dent in the bottom spring kit. If you don't have a bottom spring kit, you won't worry about this. Around the front of the loom into a dent on the spring or warp coil. So a dent, again, is a space in the spring around the top of the loom from the front to the back. And then when you hit this warping bar, just like before, you're just going to do a U-turn. So again, the rule is every time you hit the warping bar in the back of the loom, you will do a U-turn. So now I'm going to come back, go from the back to the front around the loom. And now this is the difference in warping for bead weaving with the shedding device. Instead of placing this warp thread in the next dent over, you're going to place it in the same dent that you just placed your warp thread. So you have 2 warp threads in each dent. And this is why the bottom spring kit, if you're warping for bead weaving with the shedding device, is so helpful, because you can do the same at the bottom, put that in the same dent you just put your warp thread in. So there are 2 in each dent, and it really helps to organize your warp threads. So you're going to come back around. When you hit the warping bar, you're just going to do that U-turn again. And now, since you already have 2 warp threads there, you're going to move into the next dent over. Up to the top of the loom, you already have 2 warp threads there, so you're going to move into the next dent over. Now this is really where you want to pay attention. You don't want to accidentally only do 1 in one dent and have to move everything over. You want to do this correctly the first time. So we've hit our warping bar, we're going to do a U-turn, come back around the loom from the back to the front, and now we only have 1 warp thread in that second dent, and we're going to place our second warp thread in that dent. So we have pairs of warp threads in each dent. So now we're bringing our warp thread down the loom. We're going to do the same thing here on the bottom spring. So we have 2 warp threads in that dent. Back around the loom, hit the warping bar, do a U-turn, back around the loom, and now because we have 2 in the last dent, we're going to just place this warp thread in the next dent over. And the same here, we're going to place our warp thread in the next dent over. Around, hit the warping bar, we're going to do a U-turn, come back up, and now we're going to place this warp thread in the same dent. So really very easy, pairs of warp threads. 2 warp threads in each dent, and that's really, until we put the shedding device on, that's really the only difference. So we're going to keep going, doing a U-turn, making sure to really keep our threads organized. Up the next end over, around the warping bar. And again, like I said before, you don't want to drop your warp thread when you're warping. So leave yourself enough time with no distractions so you can warp the whole piece at once. So we're back down here. We're going to place this in the second next dent over. And then we're going to do a U-turn around the warping bar. We're going to come back around. Now we're going to place our warp thread in the next dent over, both on the bottom and the top. And I know I keep mentioning this, but if you don't have a bottom spring kit, then you're just going to want to try to keep your warps organized in pairs at the bottom of the loom. It's not necessary to have, it's helpful, but you don't want to cross over your warp threads or anything, because that will make it difficult in the future. So we've hit our warping bar. The rule is whenever we hit our warping bar, we do a U-turn, and we just continue like this. So we're going to put that in the same one, and every once in a while you just want to come and check, make sure you have pairs in each one, make sure nothing's crossed, nothing's tangled. It's better to do it right the first time than to have to go try to fix a mistake. So we're just going to continue doing this. Okay, so now that I have my piece as wide as I want it, all my little pairs here, am just finishing up my last pair. This is 18 dents across, so I actually have twice as many warp threads as that. So note what I just did right there is that I was keeping the tension with this hand when I dropped this, which I probably shouldn't have dropped it, but as long as you keep that tension, it's fine. And then I'm just going to do what I did with the piece without the shedding device. I'm going to trim my thread. So then you're just going to tie onto your warping bar. Just a regular knot. There we go. I might want to trim that. Trim this other one while I'm at it. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, and this is both for bead weaving without the shedding device and with the shedding device, I'm going to swing out my wooden clips just like that, and I'm just going to bring my warping bar down. Now I want it to be about 4 or 5 inches from the bar around the loom up to where you're going to begin weaving. So I'm going to keep it just about right there. One thing you don't want to do is have the warping bar hit where your wing nuts are. So I have this all set up. Now one thing I want to do, especially things can get a little bit tangled when you move the warping bar down, is I just want to make sure everything is in their little pairs. You may want to do this with a needle or something, and it's especially important if you don't have a bottom spring kit, because you can see the bottom spring kit really keeps those pairs together. If you don't have a bottom spring kit, then it's easy to get tangled. Okay, so now we have everything all organized. I'm going to just tighten my tension a teeny bit. We still have to put heddles on, so we don't want to tighten it all the way. And we tighten the tension evenly on both sides. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to be putting the shedding device on. Because this is the only side that's warped for the shedding device, I am just going to, the shedding device is going to go all the way across, but I'm only going to attach it on this side. So this is the shedding device. There's a little hole right here for the handle. which is this. You're going to put the handle on whichever side is most comfortable for you. So if you're right-handed, you're probably going to want to put the handle on the right side. If you're left-handed, you're going to want to put it on the left side. Now you're going to swing your clips around like I just did. And you're going to, there are these little brass pieces up here at the top, and they can be loosened with a Phillips head screwdriver. So I'm just going to loosen that a little bit, and I'm going to swing this little brass circle out from the clip. And then all I do is I just place my shedding device right there into those clips. And then I can swing these back around and I can tighten them back up. And that's just going to keep your shedding device in place. So I've done that. Now, you know, as I said before, we want to always make sure everything's even. Let's go up a little bit. Okay, so we have the shedding device on the loom, and now what we're going to need to do is attach the warp threads to the shedding device. And we do that with heddles. This is a heddle. We have pre-made heddles, which is what this is. It comes on a roll of 100. You cut them yourself into these little strong little circles. You can also make them yourself. For bead weaving, when you're using a warp coil 20 or over, so you know, really, really small, we recommend making your own out of a thin beading thread because these can be a little thick for that. But for something like this, we're weaving with 11/0 seed beads with a 14 dent coil. This should work fine. This is a spring bar. It comes with every loom that has a shedding device. And what it does is it goes through this spring in front of the warp threads and it keeps them from popping out, which isn't usually a problem for bead weaving without the shedding device, but it can be with the shedding device. But we're going to use it for something different right now. We're going to make it easier to put your heddles on your loom. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to take half of these warp threads and put heddles on them for the top bar. Then we're going to swing around that bar, the shedding device, and we're going to put the other half of the warp heddles and the other half of the warp threads and attach those to the other bar. And what this will do is when you turn the shedding device, it will lift up half the warp threads. And when you turn it the other way, it will lift them up, the other half up. So to make this easier, I'm just going to take this bar and I'm going to weave it through the pairs of warp threads. So there are 2 warp threads in each dent. What I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it through each pair. And this will basically just makes it easier to see which warp threads I need to put heddles on. So you want to do this in good light, usually, because sometimes it's hard to see. Now one option, the way I did this was using one spool of one color thread to warp, and then I just brought it 2 pairs of threads in each dent. Another way you can do it is you can use 2 different color warp threads, 2 different spools as you warp, and that way you can see the difference in which warp thread is different. So if you have a red and a purple warp thread, let's say, you can see better which is which. So now that I've done that, I'm just going to put this up towards the top. So I'm just going to use this piece of wool right here to hold up my bar on each side. Just tie that in a little knot. And this is just going to help me see. You definitely don't have to do this, but we find it's helpful. So there that is. So now you have separated your top warp threads from your bottom warp threads. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to take our Allen wrench right here, and we're going to loosen this top bar. There's a little screw here that you can loosen. And I'm going to bring my bar right through here. Now all I'm going to do is I am going to put a heddle on each of the top warp threads, so the warp threads that are above this bar. If you don't put this bar in, if you just decide to do it, you're just going to put a heddle around one warp thread in each dent. So I'm just going to take this heddle, put it around like that, and place it around the bar. It helps having the bar out a little so they don't fall out. So now we're going to take our next warp thread over. So again, this is taking one warp thread from each dent. We're going to do the same thing. So basically the concept is, here's a heddle, it's a loop. And if this was the warp thread, we're going to bring it around the warp thread like this, and then onto the bar. So it's holding up the warp thread, so it pulls it up. So now we're going to take our next warp thread over. Now some people do the same thing, just like that. Some people find it very helpful to use something like a crochet hook to just grab the warp thread, because sometimes it's hard to do with just our fingers. There we go. We just keep doing this. Now this is where you do not want to make a mistake. I'd say the biggest problem people have with weaving with the shedding device is just making a simple mistake at this stage. So missing a warp thread, not putting a heddle on securely, taking a warp thread from the wrong warp thread, something like that. So you just have to be really careful, and you just want to kind of keep checking, you know, make sure you're doing it right from the beginning, because that's going to make it a whole lot easier for you. So here we have it again, just placing that heddle on. So it's actually, the concept is very simple, but it takes some practice, and it can be frustrating if you do it wrong, especially if you're doing a wide piece. If you do it incorrectly, then you have to go back and fix it, and it can be a pain. So just do it right the first time, take your time, do it when you're not stressed out about anything. But you know, for some people, it's actually kind of meditative process, although I would say weaving is more so. Let's just continue doing this. Now, one thing I'd like to note is that if this is your first time warping with a shedding device, don't start out with a really wide piece. Start out with a little bracelet or just a practice piece. And that will give you some practice doing this and understanding how it works, and it will make it so much easier when you try it with a wide piece. So start out small, practice. Once you get it, then you've gotten it, you know. The concept isn't very difficult. It's just sometimes it's easy to make a mistake. I am just putting my last heddle on, just like this. And then right now I'm just going to pull this out a little. I'm going to check, make sure that I have everything. And then I'm just going to push this back in here. I want to make sure that it's not sticking out either way, because that will prevent the shedding device from working. Then I'm going to tighten this up. I can check one more time. There, that looks good. And now I'm just going to rotate the shedding device down. So I have this next bar on the top, and I'm going to do the same thing that I just did, this time with my second set of heddles. There's one thing that's really important to remember when you're putting on your second set of heddles, and it is you are going to move the warp thread where you're putting on your second heddle always to the right of the warp thread that you put your first heddle on. You could also do them always to the left, but you have to stay consistent because otherwise your heddles are going to get crossed. Again, this is a place where it's easy to make mistakes, so you have to really concentrate and just keep checking. And if you do that, you won't make a mistake. So you can see here that these are my top warp threads that have this bar on it. So this first warp thread already has a heddle on it. So I'm going to move that over, and I'm going to find the first warp thread in the back. I'm going to bring that out. You note that the first warp thread is to the left. I'm bringing it to the right of that warp thread. And I'm just going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to place that heddle right on it. Just like that. So now I'm going to go to the second one. Here's my second heddle. I'm going to move that over. I'm going to find that second heddle. I'm going to bring it to the right of the first one. The second warp thread. And I'm going to put a heddle around it. So again, I'm doing my third one. I found my third warp thread. I'm going to move that to the side. I'm going to find my third warp thread in the back right there. There it is. I found that warp thread, and I'm going to put a heddle around it. So the concept is simple. All you're going to do is place these heddles around your second set of warp threads, and you're going to make sure that you're being consistent about which side that second warp thread is being brought to. So here we have our fourth warp thread. So this one's on the front, and then here's the one on the back. This is really where the crochet hook can come in handy. So there's my heddle on that. So we've moved those over. Now we're working on our fifth one. There's our fifth warp thread over. And bringing this next warp thread behind to the right of that warp thread. So you can understand, if you think about it, how your heddles and your warp threads will get crossed if you're not consistent about that. And you can see here, pull it out, those are gonna pull out. So now we have those. There's our next warp thread over, and there's my warp thread behind it. It's a good idea to have very good lighting when you're doing this. Another thing you can do is you could place a piece of paper behind your back warp threads, the warp threads in the back of the loom and in the front, because it makes it easier to see. Sometimes it can kind of look like an optical illusion when you have all those warp threads there. So we'll check. This is the last one with a heddle on it. I'm going to move the one in the front over, and I'm going to just grab that warp thread in the back. And you can kind of move it around and make sure that there's not a heddle on it. Oops. There we go. And there we go. Make sure these are all even. So again, we're going to put another heddle on. So here is our warp thread that already has a heddle on it right here. And behind here is the warp thread we need to put the heddle on. So we're bringing this to the right of that. There's another crochet hook. There that is. And then we're placing a heddle around it. And I'm ready to put my last heddle on. I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to find this one. The last one's really easy. We have that. place our heddle around it. And there we go. All done. So now we're going to do the same thing that we did before with the other side. Push this through. I'm going to tighten it. Remember that you can't have your rods hanging off the side because otherwise it will hit when you change the shed. So now I'm going to take this top bar off. You're going to take your spring bar, you're going to place it in your spring, your warp coil at the top, making sure that it goes over the warp threads. And this, just when you move your shedding device, will prevent your warp threads from popping out at all. So now, one last time, I'm just going to do a little test. I'm going to make sure we have half and half. You may need to, at this point, kind of do a little shuffling. Make sure that everything is moving smoothly. Because sometimes when you haven't moved this yet, your warp threads can get caught up on each other. Another thing you want to do at this point is take your heddles here at the bottom. Make sure the ends are sticking out. You want these all kind of as organized as possible because sometimes these ends can make it more difficult for the warp threads to move. And the most important thing to make sure throughout this whole process is that you don't cross any heddles, because if there are crossed heddles, you're not going to get a correct shed. So just going through, so if you, now it looks like I've kind of separated everything, and you can see how I have this really nice shed right here. I can bring my hand through when I'm pulled one way, and then when I move it the other way, I'm going to do the same thing that I just did, kind of start to make sure nothing's crossed, and you can see I have this really nice shed here. So it looks like I did everything right, and the next thing I'm going to do is place my handle on my loom. There's a little piece at the end of the handle. I'm just going to screw that off. And I'm going to place the handle in this hole here on the side. I want the handle to be this way, so it's going to go like this. And then when it comes up, it's going to go like this. I just place the handle right through here, all the way through the end, and then I'm just going to replace that screw at the end. There we go. And now, when I move my shedding device from the bottom to the top, I'm making a shed. And it's going to take, once you've been weaving for a couple rows, everything's going to work itself out. At the beginning, you may need to unstick some warp threads and make sure everything goes smoothly, but it can take a couple rows for that to happen. So now I'm going to tighten up my tension just a little bit more. Now, and this is on both sides. This is the shedding device side, this is the not shedding device side. You don't want it too tight that your warp threads are going to break. You definitely don't need it as tight as tapestry weaving. For tapestry weaving, which can also be done on this loom, which is the fiber weaving, you want your warp threads very tight. For bead weaving, you want them just taut, but not too tight. So there we go. We have warped the Mirrix Loom for the shedding device on this side and without the shedding device on this side. Thanks for watching.